For that press conference. We've been told several times that the two leaders are actually in the corridor, just on the sidelines, on the wings there of this particular stage, waiting to come on and address the international press that's gathered there at this base, this US base in Alaska. Just a reminder that US President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin have been meeting for about 3 hours or so. They've been talking about the war in Ukraine. And interestingly enough, the third party involved in this war, and that is President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine, is not involved in these talks. But there are hopes that perhaps this is just the first step towards a path towards peace, and more talks will then happen. Yeah,
and we're starting to see some commentary coming out of particularly some of those Russian delegates that were involved. That's being reported as the Russian envoy saying it went incredibly well. Kirill Dmitriev telling Interfax news agency, as it's being reported, that's what happened, and that there was a really warm tone to it. We've also seen BBC reporting the atmosphere of the talks was quite positive on the whole, and that was according to Russian ambassador to the UF, Alexander Dachiev, and that's been already in Russian media. So we're already seeing reporting coming out of this summit, these talks going straight into presumably some of that state media in Russia. And of course it's coming full circle. You can see there some of the reporters in the room that have gathered that are doing crosses, and we know that in the front row there are a number of Russian ministers, including the Russian defence minister is sitting there. You can see him on the left side of the screen there as more people are coming into the room.
That's right. Now, Dan, this meeting is high stakes. There are high stakes involved in this meeting, of course. The fact, too, that the leaders had expected to meet one-on-one, but actually they were joined by senior US and Russian officials. Now, President Trump had said that he would not be happy if a ceasefire was not agreed to today. That is a lot of expectation there on the president, but it also is a reflection of what he expects from his Russian counterpart. He does want to see an end to this war that's been going on for about 3.5 years now. President Putin reportedly hasn't quite shifted from his own goal of quote, dominating Ukraine, as he has said in several times in his own press conferences. And if we look at what's happening on the battleground itself, on the ground, a lot of Russian soldiers and the Russian military has really surged ahead and has had this wave of victories into Ukraine just in the last few days or so. This is ahead of this particular much anticipated meeting. Now, lots of people are saying, well, this is the last push for Russia wanting to claim more territory in Ukraine. Ukraine, on the other hand, the President Zelensky saying Ukraine will not cede any land and wants to return to the original border.
And one of the things that I thought was really interesting this morning, we heard from Dr. Leonid Petrov, a Russian academic based at the ANU, who was really saying, look, there is very little incentive for Vladimir Putin to move on what he wants, because what, as he was putting it, Dr. Petrov, is that really the Russian president has created a common enemy for the Russian people in Ukraine, and so it is focusing attention. He was saying that family he's talking to are saying that roads are being built, infrastructure is happening, that money is still getting into Russia through oil and gas that's being only through a few avenues can it leave the country. China is amongst those, but that there's a real focus. The other thing that Dr. Petrov was saying is that if this war ends, you're going to see hundreds of thousands of troops coming back, and what does that do for the economy, the support structures that might need to be in place as well? So there's this real tension, Fowles, that you have the Russian president seemingly, from what we can garner, not wanting this to come to an end. Donald Trump, by all reports, is that he doesn't like seeing war. Dr. Petrov said that very clearly, and that he wants this to be a focus of his first days. In fact, he said, but now we're nine months in, and so there is so much expectation, because how do you find a middle ground when you've got two world leaders who want diametrically opposed outcomes from this situation, and you've got the main party in the middle who's not at the table.
Exactly, not there. Well, let's talk about the main party.
Yeah.
Because, as we've heard from Elias Klur, who's reporting for us from Kyiv, many residents in Kyiv and Ukraine are actually skeptical about this meeting. They think nothing will actually come out of it. They too have suffered. Their economy has suffered. They've lost fathers, brothers, uncles in this war as well. In fact, the Ukraine army has been depleted, and now they're depending on reserves as well. So, on the Ukrainian side, many people there are very skeptical about the fact that this meeting is taking place and that they think nothing will actually come out of it. President Zelensky, on the other hand, has said that he does depend on Washington and he trusts Mr. Trump to actually deliver for him and ensure that there is some sort of peaceful outcome to this war that's been going for about 3.5 years now. However, Mr. Zelensky is adamant that no land, no Ukrainian land will be ceded to Russia as part of any peace deal.
And somewhat of a shift in language. I just want to point to, here we're seeing some of those delegates, Mark Rubio, who was in the room in those discussions, Pete Hegseth, the Defence Secretary, sitting a little closer to camera. So we're seeing that side angle there as those delegates are coming in. Some of the Russians that were there in the meeting also gathering there. That shot was just jittery. We are hoping that it's going to hold firm, and I'm having a look at the other screens. We're not seeing yet the main speakers, of course, the presidents of Russia and the United States gathering. But we see, it appeared we saw some maybe tweaking of the language from Volodymyr Zelensky in last week. He was talking about this being bluffing by the Russians. And then just overnight, after meeting with Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, he was saying, well, I'm much more hopeful that there will be peace and that there will be a pathway here.
Yeah, indeed. Just a reminder to our viewers of Weekend Breakfast that what we are waiting for are the leaders of the United States and Russia to come out after their 3-hour meeting together on talks on Ukraine and ending the war in Ukraine. We have been told that they are both waiting on the wings of that particular stage. This is a historic moment for these two leaders. In fact, it'll be the 8th time that these two leaders actually meet. President Trump, of course, wanting to end this war in Ukraine, and President Vladimir Putin wanting to ensure that there is success for Russia. And we can just see them now just entering the press room and about to speak. Let's take you there to Anchorage, Alaska there.
Mr. President,
where we are waiting
gentlemen,
for them to speak.
Our negotiations have been held in a constructive atmosphere of mutual respect. We have very thorough negotiations that were quite useful. I would like to thank once again my American counterpart for the proposal to travel out here to Alaska. It only makes sense that we've met here because our countries, though separated by the oceans, are close neighbors. So when we've met, when I came out of the plane and I've said, "Good afternoon, dear neighbor. Very good to see you. In good health and to see you alive." I think that is very neighborly. And I think that's some kind words that we can say to each other. We're separated by the Strait of Bering, though there are 2 islands only between the Russian island and the U.S. island. They're only 4 kilometers apart. We're close neighbors, and it's a fact. It's also important that Alaska has to do with our common heritage, common history between Russia and the U.S., and many positive events have to do with that territory. Still, there is tremendous cultural heritage back from the Russian America. For example, Orthodox churches and a lot of more than 700 geographical names of Russian origin. During the Second World War, it was here in Alaska that was the origin of the legendary air bridge for the supply of military aircraft and other equipment under the Lend-Lease program. It was a dangerous and treacherous route over the vast emptiness of ice. However, the pilots of both countries did everything to bring closer the victory. They risked their lives and they gave it all for the common victory. I was just in the city of Magadan in Russia, and there is a memorial there dedicated to the Russian and the U.S. pilots. And there are two flags, the U.S. flag and the Russian flag. And I know that here as well, there is such a memorial. There is a military burial place several kilometers away from here. The Soviet pilots are buried there who died during that dangerous mission. We're thankful to the citizens and the government of the U.S. for carefully taking care of their memory. I think that's very worthy and noble. We'll always remember other historical examples when our countries defeated common enemies together in the spirit of battle camaraderie and allyship that supported each other and facilitated each other. I'm sure that this heritage will help us rebuild and foster mutually beneficial and equal ties at this new stage, even during the hardest conditions. It is known that there have been no summits between Russia and the U.S. for 4 years, and that's a long time. This time was very hard for bilateral relations, and let's be frank, they have fallen to the lowest point since the Cold War. I think that's not benefiting our countries and the world as a whole. It is apparent that sooner or later we had to amend the situation to move on from the confrontation to dialogue. And in this case, a personal meeting between the heads of state has been long overdue. Naturally, under the condition of serious and painstaking work, and this work has been done in general. Me and President Trump have very good direct contact. We've spoken multiple times. We spoke frankly on the phone. And Special Envoy of the President, Mr. Witkoff, traveled out to Russia several times. Our advisors and heads of foreign ministries kept in touch all the time. And you know fully well that one of the central issues was the situation around Ukraine. We see the strive of the administration and President Trump personally to help facilitate the resolution of the Ukrainian conflict. And his strive to get to the crux of the matter, to understand this history, is precious. As I've said, the situation in Ukraine has to do with fundamental threats to our security. Moreover, we've always considered the Ukrainian nation, and I've said it multiple times, a brotherly nation, however strange it may sound in these conditions. We have the same roots, and everything that's happening is a tragedy for us and terrible wound. Therefore, the country is sincerely interested in putting an end to it. At the same time, we're convinced that in order to make the settlement lasting and long-term, we need to eliminate all the primary roots, the primary causes of that conflict. And we've said it multiple times, to consider all legitimate concerns of Russia and to reinstate a just balance of security in Europe and in the world on the whole. And I agree with President Trump, as he has said today, that naturally the security of Ukraine should be ensured as well. Naturally, we're prepared to work on that. I would like to hope that the agreement that we've reached together will help us bring closer that goal and will pave the path towards peace in Ukraine. We expect that Kiev and European capitals will perceive that constructively and that they won't throw a wrench in the works. They will not make any attempts to use some backroom dealings to conduct provocations to torpedo the nascent progress. Incidentally, when the new administration came to power, bilateral trade started to grow. It's still very symbolic. Still, we have a growth of 20%. As I've said, we have a lot of dimensions for joint work. It is clear that the U.S. and Russian investment and business cooperation has tremendous potential. Russia and the U.S. can offer each other so much in trade, digital, high-tech, and in space exploration. We see that Arctic cooperation is also very possible, and our international context, for example, between the Far East of Russia and the West Coast of the U.S. Overall, it's very important for our countries to turn the page, to go back to cooperation. It is symbolic that not far away from here, at the border between Russia and the U.S., there was a so-called international date line. I think you can step over, literally, from yesterday into tomorrow. And I hope that we'll succeed in that, in political sphere. I would like to thank President Trump for our joint work, for the well-wishing and trustworthy tone of our conversation. It's important that both sides are result-oriented, and we see that the President of the U.S. has a very clear idea of what he would like to achieve. He sincerely cares about prosperity of his nation. Still, he understands that Russia has its own national interests. I expect that today's agreements will be the starting point, not only for the solution of the Ukrainian issue, but also will help us bring back business-like and pragmatic relations between Russia and the U.S. And in the end, I would like to add one more thing. I'd like to remind you that in 2022, during the last contact with the previous administration, I tried to convince my previous American colleague that the situation should not be brought to the point of no return when it would come to hostilities. And I said it quite directly back then, that it's a big mistake. Today, when President Trump saying that if he was the president back then, there will be no war. And I'm quite sure that it would indeed be so. I can confirm that. I think that overall, me and President Trump have built a very good, business-like and trustworthy contact. And I have every reason to believe that moving down this path, we can come, and the sooner the better, to the end of the conflict in Ukraine. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. That was very profound. And I will say that I believe we had a very productive meeting. There were many, many points that we agreed on, most of them, I would say, a couple of big ones that we haven't quite gotten there, but we've made some headway. So there's no deal until there's a deal. I will call up NATO in a little while. I will call up the various people that I think are appropriate, and I'll, of course, call up President Zelensky and tell him about today's meeting. It's ultimately up to them. They're going to have to agree with what Marco and Steve and some of the great people from the Trump administration who've come here, Scott and John Radcliffe, thank you very much. But we have some of our really great leaders. They've been doing a phenomenal job. We also have some tremendous Russian business representatives here, and I think, you know, everybody wants to deal with us. We've become the hottest country anywhere in the world in a very short period of time, and we look forward to that. We look forward to dealing. We're going to try and get this over with. We really made some great progress today. I've always had a fantastic relationship with President Putin, with Vladimir. We had many tough meetings, good meetings. We were interfered with by the Russia hoax. That made it a little bit tougher to deal with, but he understood it. I think he's probably seen things like that during the course of his career. He's seen it all. But we had to put up with the Russia hoax. He knew it was a hoax, and I knew it was a hoax. But what was done was very criminal. But it made it harder for us to deal as a country in terms of the business and all of the things that we'd like to have dealt with. But we'll have a good chance when this is over. So just to put it very quickly, I'm going to start making a few phone calls and tell them what happened. But we had an extremely productive meeting, and many points were agreed to. There are just a very few that are left. Some are not that significant. One is probably the most significant, but we have a very good chance of getting there. We didn't get there, but we have a very good chance of getting there. I would like to thank President Putin and his entire team, whose faces, who I know in many cases, otherwise, other than that, whose faces I get to see all the time in the newspapers. You're almost as famous as the boss, but especially this one right over here. But we had some good meetings over the years, right? Good, productive meetings over the years, and we hope to have that in the future. But let's do the most productive one right now. We're going to stop really 5, 6, 7,000, thousands of people a week from being killed, and President Putin wants to see that as much as I do. So, again, Mr. President, I'd like to thank you very much, and we'll speak to you very soon and probably see you again very soon. Thank you very much, Vladimir.
Next time in Moscow.
Oh, that's an interesting one. I don't know. I'll get a little heat on that one, but I could see it possibly happening. Thank you very much, Vladimir. And thank you all. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Concluding that summit, much anticipated summit over ending the war in Ukraine. Very interestingly, they both came out to hold a joint news conference. They didn't take any questions from the media. They addressed the media. We saw there the US leader allowing President Putin to address the media, to speak first. You could really see the friendship between the two men as well, couldn't you, Dan? Vladimir Putin there saying that there was indeed a need to eliminate the primary roots of the conflict in Ukraine, and he has said that the security of Ukraine should also be ensured as well. Donald Trump, on the other hand, had been hoping that some sort of a ceasefire agreement would be announced today, but he said, we didn't get a deal today, but we have a very good chance of resolving the conflict. No doubt, Dan, that's implying that there will be more talks going forward.
And potentially in Moscow, as President Putin said at the end, and President Trump saying, I'll cop some heat over that.
Yeah.
What was extraordinary in that is what was not said, and the gulf between the expectation and what has been shared with the media in this moment is as big as the ocean that separates, well, perhaps not the strait, but the rest of the countries. What really stuck out to me was the point that President Trump said about, I will call up NATO. Why exactly is President Trump going to be calling NATO? What is that about? Because you heard the point that was made very clearly by President Putin about the blockers.
That's right.
Clearly referring to the European Union or NATO, perhaps. And we know NATO has been an ongoing component of this. Ukraine wants NATO membership. Russia is vehemently adamant that is not to be the case.
Exactly.
And so there is this real gulf now about where this lands things. You've got President Trump saying this was a productive meeting. Many points were agreed upon, and there was headway made on some areas where there wasn't agreement. And then for his part, President Putin saying that really stoking, you would have to say, the ego of President Trump, touched on bilateral trade up by 20%, talked about high-tech, digital, space exploration, Arctic cooperation, all these areas. And in terms of Ukraine itself, we heard President Putin say about an agreement. So what is this agreement? And he said, quote, I would like to hope that the agreement that we've reached together will help us bring us closer to that goal and will pave the way towards peace in Ukraine. And that was it about this agreement. There's been these kind of broad brushstrokes alluding to whatever was agreed upon.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
And no detail.
No detail at all. Well, let's get more analysis on this and bring in our America's editor, who is standing by for us in Anchorage, Alaska now. John Lyons, you've been listening in to this summit. What do you make of it? What really stood out for you?
Well, Fauzia, Donald Trump said the other day that Vladimir Putin had fooled many US presidents going back 5 or 6 presidents. It appears from what we've just seen that Vladimir Putin has fooled yet another US president, this time Donald Trump. It was interesting that Vladimir Putin spoke, who normally does not like engaging with the press, spoke for much longer in that what we've just been watching than Donald Trump did. There is no immediate ceasefire, there is no conditional ceasefire, there is no agreement, although Vladimir Putin hinted at agreement. But it's clear the Russians have turned up here wanting to make this about business opportunities with America. Vladimir Putin talked about digital economy and high-tech and space exploration, when in obviously Donald Trump wanted to be able to announce something about Ukraine and a ceasefire. The best that Donald Trump got, and it was pretty lukewarm, was to say, I'm going to make a phone call to NATO. I'm going to make a phone call to Zelensky. I think Vladimir Putin has played a blinder and has fooled yet another US president.
This is absolutely extraordinary. There was that one line that really was resonating in my head, John, that I wanted to save to talk about until we were talking to you, where President Putin said, and I quote, "We are convinced that in order to make this settlement lasting and long-term, we need to eliminate all the primary roots, the primary causes that have conflict, and we've said it multiple times, to consider all legitimate concerns of Russia and to reinstate a just balance in Europe and in the world as a whole." That language is so loaded when it comes to diplomacy, isn't it?
Well, that's right, Dan. Essentially, what Vladimir Putin was saying is that all of the, quote, root causes of the problem basically remain. And it was fascinating because he said that Donald Trump had said many times the war would not have happened had he been president. Vladimir Putin actually said a short time ago, that is true. The war would not have happened had Trump been leader. In other words, Vladimir Putin is blaming the US for this war. He's blaming Joe Biden for this war. The only concession, the bit of blood from the stone that Donald Trump got, was when Vladimir Putin acknowledged that Ukraine is a country, which is something normally he doesn't do, and he talked about admitting to the need for the security of Ukraine. That's the only benefit or concession that Donald Trump got.
What did he mean by that? And I'm going to quote Vladimir Putin here, where he said today that the security of Ukraine should be ensured as well. What are you reading into that?
What I read into that, Fauzier, is that was the little bone. That was the little bit of the little crumb that Vladimir Putin threw to Donald Trump, giving him that little bit of concession. Sure, we need to ensure the security of Ukraine. It was the only sentence there. Everything else from Putin was about the root causes. We must eliminate them. What Vladimir Putin means when he says eliminate the causes of this war and Russia's concerns means killing more people, continuation of the war. Essentially, Vladimir Putin, with that lovely suit that he wears and that demeanour, he came out and he essentially, what he said in code was the war will continue. Donald Trump can go off and make his phone calls if he wants to. For Trump to be reduced, for the President of the United States to be reduced to making phone calls to NATO or to Zelensky, I think this is a complete and utter failure by Donald Trump.
Do you think the President Donald Trump, knows he's been played?
I think so, but there's another elephant in the room here, Fauzier, that underwrites a lot of this that we haven't talked about, and that it's a real issue. Russia has the largest number of nuclear warheads of any country. It has more than the United States, which is something that a lot of people often don't think about. They have some 5,400 according to various nuclear agencies. Now, that has always been a concern to the United States. In terms of the war over the last 3 years, it's pretty clear from statements made by US military officials and other officials in Europe, for example, military people, that America did not want the Russians to win this war, but they did not want the Russians to lose this war, because they feared that life after Putin could be unpredictable. There were all sorts of these security gangs and these oligarchs' armies and whatever. And I think the Americans in Washington feared that there could be internal chaos the way we saw in the old Yugoslavia when that broke up. And they did not want those nuclear warheads in the arms of these various oligarch armies. Now, that's the reason I think that Donald Trump is treading lightly at this meeting. I think we need to understand that, to understand why Donald Trump was reduced to making a couple of phone calls.
John, I want to take you on a small tangent, because you talked about Yugoslavia there. We've touched on the socio-economic political situation across this part of Europe. We've talked for years and years about the vision that Vladimir Putin has. Of course, he rose to prominence from the KGB, then as a mayor of St. Petersburg, into politics. His vision is a reunification of the Soviet Union, isn't it? And so when he said that line about Ukraine, the security of Ukraine should be ensured as well, is it possible that he was actually being utterly consistent with his language of saying that the only way Ukraine would be secure is if it is returned and a part of Russia, as of course it was in the past before the breakup of the Soviet Union?
Well, Dan, I think you're a very good interpreter of what Vladimir Putin's his mind is, because the most traumatic event of that generation, Vladimir Putin, his fellow KGB officers, these are the men in their 70s. The most traumatic event of Vladimir Putin's life was the end of the old Soviet Empire, and that's been well chronicled. The end of Greater Russia. And when he saw Mikhail Gorbachev and others go in for glasnost and perestroika and the end of the Soviet Union, people like Vladimir Putin were horrified. So Vladimir Putin's driving force is to try to reclaim that Greater Russia. And of course, Ukraine is part of that. It's a big part of it. They've got that was the second biggest office of their KGB during the Soviet era, was in Kyiv. And so I think that for Vladimir Putin, Donald Trump hosting him here in Alaska is not going to stop that driving ambition that he wants to reclaim parts of the Greater Russia.
John, we've spoken now from the Russian point of view. We've seen the American point of view. I want to go now towards the European point of view. Of course, you know, the Europeans are supporting President Zelensky. They are allies. We saw that big hug between Keir Starmer and President Zelensky when he visited Downing Street. But I wonder how the European leaders would have been watching this particular press conference.
Mixed feelings, I think, Fauzia. There's a couple of different sort of agendas going on here, apart from the war between the Russians and the Ukrainians. There is a battle between the Europeans and Donald Trump. The Europeans are desperately trying to enlist Donald Trump to help them a bit. Now, they've had a bit of success in the last few days. Donald Trump was going to go into this meeting, a one-on-one with Putin, where the Europeans thought that he was going to start agreeing to what areas would be, would remain as part of Russia. Now, that hasn't happened. So the Europeans will be relieved that with those three Americans in the room, Steve Witkoff, Marco Rubio and Donald Trump, that there was not a deal made to carve up, Russia and redraw the boundaries. However, they would have listened with a chill down their spines when they heard Vladimir Putin talk about the need to eliminate the key causes here. That would have sent a chill through the European leaders, because that is Vladimir Putin saying the war will continue. It doesn't matter what Donald Trump does. He can have me here to Alaska. He can meet me on a red carpet. He can clap 3 times as I'm walking towards him on the tarmac. This war will continue. And that is why the Europeans will be chilled by this.
And John, speaking of the Europeans, we heard that very pointed comment from President Trump that he was going to call NATO. What did that say to you?
The most powerful man in the world, allegedly, making a phone call to NATO. That's what it's been reduced to. He said at the end, I think they were his exact words, that was his sort of sign-up. I'm going to make a phone call to NATO, and I'm going to make a phone call to Volodymyr Zelensky to let them know how today went. A phone call? This is the most powerful man in the world, and he stands there while Vladimir Putin talks about the need to eliminate the root causes, and it's all about, I'm going to make a phone call. I mean, when people say, oh yeah, I'll follow it up or I'll make a phone call, usually it means nothing. And so, maybe Donald Trump's got an agenda or a strategy there that we don't understand, but if you are looking at that last 40 or 50 minutes, any student of history would think Russia has won, Putin has won.
Yeah, that message seems to be very clear. John Lyons from Anchorage in Alaska, our America's editor, thank you so much. We will be touching base. You're not off the hook yet. There's a lot more to talk about across the day and the days ahead. Thanks so much, John.
Well, let's get more reaction now to that historic meeting between Russian and US leaders. We're now joined by the ambassador of Ukraine to Australia, Vasyl Miroshnichenko. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. You also have been listening in to that summit press conference. What are your initial thoughts?
We commend President Trump on his initiative to end this war. And I would like to address some of the comments that the Russian president made, which I think very important to interpret that. And thanks to John Lyons, he's already given you a good analysis of what has happened. But generally, when Putin talks about root cause of war, is independent Ukraine on the map of Europe. That's the only cause of war for Russia. As you know, he planned to take over Kyiv in several days, take over entire Ukraine in several weeks. He invaded Ukraine in 2014. 8 years later, got emboldened by the very weak reaction to his war in Donbass and Crimea, and then he came back with a much bigger war. Can't pursue his imperialistic ambition of destroying democracy next door. You have to understand that Putin has been running his country for 25 years unchallenged. All those business people who came with him are just his cronies who carry his money. This is not their money, and they're, of course, ready to invest in real estate or any other deals in America, because this is Putin's money, and he tells them where they have to invest. So, I mean, Putin is just out there on his mission to revive Soviet Union, to revive the Russian Empire, and of course, it cannot be revived without Ukraine. So, just overnight, as we speak, Russians have attacked many Ukrainian cities, sent many drones. So we don't really see any indication of him ending this war. It's good that the meeting probably took place. I'm very kind of cautious about, totally discarding that. But for now, Putin just used this opportunity to basically, spread his disinformation and spread his narrative, which we've heard many times before.
Ambassador, there's so much I want to get your reaction to, but chief amongst them is this comment that was made by President Putin that, and I quote, "We are convinced that in order to make the settlement lasting and long-term, we need to eliminate all the primary roots, the primary causes." When you hear that and you hear President Putin speaking of the settlement and eliminating the challenges, really, how do you react?
Well, as I have explained, that for Putin, it means Ukraine under the Russian occupation. That's the only root cause of war, independent Ukraine, sovereign Ukraine. Putin wants to take over it. He wants to, conduct a genocide. This is what is happening in the occupied territories of Ukraine. 20% of the Ukrainian territory is occupied by Russia. So he would be happy if he could take over Ukraine and everybody would have just accepted that. But Ukrainians did not accept it. We fought courageously 3 years ago, and he failed to achieve it. And he's been waging this war for now 3.5 years, killing, over 1 million Russians, many Ukrainians as well. But he is not demonstrating any sign of ending this war. He feels like he's got an upper hand. He's incrementally gaining ground. He's getting welcomed as a global leader. And for a dictator who's been, looting his own country for 25 years, who has authoritarian regime in place, I mean, that's like a huge win. And certainly we welcome America's involvement in this to make sure that this war can end. But we all understand it can't end without Ukraine involved, without Europe involved, without different nations who are in Europe, because we can't discuss the security of Europe without Europe at the table. And we all understand how consequential this is going to be for the entire world, for Australia, for other countries, because what we are witnessing is, of course, these are historic moments. And 10 years from now, 20 years from now, we're going to look back and see who did the right thing, who didn't do the right thing, right? And for now, we see Putin is just one of those really evil man, who's looted his country, destroying Ukraine at the moment, killing Ukrainians, is responsible for those war crimes, crimes against humanity, for an act of aggression. And just having nuclear weapons and using nuclear weapons as a threat, saying, look, we're going to do whatever we want because we got nuclear weapons. And that's it. You just have to accept it. And look what we are getting into, right? I mean, he may end up occupying 20% of the Ukrainian land.
Now, Ambassador, apologies for interrupting, but I just want to throw another quote for you from Putin, who said, well, today we need to acknowledge that the security of Ukraine should be ensured as well. Our correspondent, America's editor, John Lyons, had said, well, that was a bone thrown to Donald Trump. But do you think it is along the same vein as you were talking about, perhaps what Putin sees in terms of ensuring Ukraine's security is to engulf Ukraine and make it part of Russia? And that's the only way, in his eyes, Ukraine can be safe.
Well, I don't know, to be frank. I don't understand what Putin says. I mean, it's clearly his imperialistic ambitions are obvious, but definitely for Ukraine, we need boots on the ground from European nations. We need to have strong military. We need to integrate into the European Union, and eventually we'll have to become members of NATO. That's the only way how we can have security guarantees for our future, because Russians, even if we get any ceasefire, they will resupply, rearm, and will invade Ukraine 4 years from now. Russians will not give up on that objective, which is pretty clear in the Russian system, which is pretty clear in the Russian chauvinistic kind of foreign policy, which they are pursuing at the moment. And therefore, for us, for Ukrainians, we don't have any other choice. We have to keep on fighting. And strength is the only thing that Russia understands. So Russia must be isolated. More sanctions must be put on Russia. More military support for Ukraine. This is the only thing which Russia understands. And President Zelensky said it very clearly. Russia understands American strengths. And make no mistake, it's American strength. And I hope that behind the closed doors, President Trump clearly articulated what's going to happen if Russia does not agree to a ceasefire and does not agree to, stopping this war, because Russia is the only country which is responsible for this war.
Ambassador, as this summit is taking place, we also understand that Russian troops are still forging ahead, trying to claim as much land as they can from Ukraine. Now, President Zelensky has refused to concede any territory to Russia, but in any negotiations, there would have to be some sort of compromise. What is it that Kyiv would be willing to compromise in order to achieve a ceasefire?
I think it's a wrong question, because we don't have to come with any compromise because we didn't start this war. By asking this question, you're referring perhaps Ukraine is responsible for the fact that Russia has invaded us. No, we are not. We're just fighting back. We're a victim. And Russians invaded Ukraine because they wanted to take over entire territory of Ukraine. We're just fighting back. We don't really understand what kind of concessions we have to make. What is that we have to give up? Because imagine that Australia is getting invaded by a country and they say, look, we're going to keep 2 of your states, Victoria and New South Wales, in exchange for peace. Will you go for it? And I think it's also important to remind you, I mean, Putin talked about Second World War. I was at a big ceremony at the Australian War Memorial yesterday. It was a very poignant ceremony, but Ukraine lost 12 million people in the Second World War. 12 million. And this is just to give you an idea. You lost 40,000 in the Second World War. We lost 12 million people. And, his references to the Second World War are heartbreaking for me personally, because my grandfather, who passed away 1 month before the invasion at the age of 95, he was liberating Budapest. He fought the Nazi. And Ukrainians lost more people, and they're followed by Belarus, and only then by the Russians, actually, because most of the battlefield was in Ukraine and Belarus. And you have to understand that what we had to go through in the 20th century, including the genocide of starvation in the 30s, this is what Russian imperialism is all about, which is manifested in the communism and now manifested in modern-day Putin.
And Mr. Ambassador, if I may just ask finally about one of the comments that we heard from President Putin about a, quote, agreement. He said, and I quote, I would like to hope that the agreement that we've reached together will help us bring closer that goal and will pave the way towards peace in Ukraine, but no other detail about that agreement. How do you read that?
I think President Trump was pretty clear, no deal until there is a deal. And there must be Ukraine, there must be Europe there at the table. It's a good sign. I mean, it would be quite extraordinary if they came up to a press conference and said, we got a deal. Without Ukraine there, without European nations, without Britain, without France, without European Union and other partners, right? I mean, this war is the largest war in the world since the Second World War. 650,000 Russian troops on the ground. The movement of the weapons and missiles which Russians are using, it never happened. I mean, it's been a while when last time it happened. And this war and the outcome of this war and the security architecture in Europe will shape the security of Indo-Pacific. Because if one country, which is a permanent member of the UN Security Council, which has nuclear weapons, can do whatever they want with their neighbors, it is a blueprint for any other authoritarian leader, especially here in the region. And I think a lot is at stake for the future security and stability of Australia, of your trade, of your secure supply chains and everything. I mean, I think we're in the same boat. We are fighting for democracy, we're fighting for human rights, we are fighting for rule of law, the values that this country, Australia, was built on.
Ambassador from Ukraine to Australia, Vasyl Miroshnichenko, thank you so much for your time this morning.